For centuries, the very mention of the word Viking has conjured images of brutality, of horned helmets and unbridled savagery, of longships disgorging hordes of berserkers onto unsuspecting shores. It is a narrative deeply etched into the collective consciousness, one forged in the fires of monastic chroniclers and later embellished by romanticized Victorian imaginations. But to truly understand what it meant to be a Viking warrior, to peer beyond the caricature and into the brutal, complex reality of their existence, requires a more dispassionate examination. It demands that we strip away the layers of myth and confront the harsh pragmatism that defined their world. This was not a people defined solely by their capacity for violence, but rather by an intricate tapestry of societal norms, economic imperatives, spiritual beliefs, and a profound connection to the land and sea that shaped every facet of their lives. To be a Viking warrior was not merely to wield an axe. It was to embody a particular worldview, to navigate a perilous world with a specific set of skills, and to live by a code that, while alien to modern sensibilities, was entirely logical within its own context. The genesis of the Viking Age, roughly spanning from the late 8th to the mid-11th century, was not a sudden eruption of bloodlust from the frozen north. Rather, it was a confluence of factors: technological advancements in shipbuilding, demographic pressures, a changing climate, and a growing awareness of the wealth to be found in the more settled, Christianized lands to the south. The longship, often considered the pinnacle of their engineering prowess, was not merely a vessel for war, but a multi-purpose tool for trade, exploration, and settlement. Its shallow draft allowed it to penetrate far up rivers, its flexibility made it resilient in rough seas, and its speed was unmatched. This technological superiority was the bedrock upon which the Viking warriors' capabilities were built. Without the ship, the raids, the trade routes, the settlements, and indeed the very concept of being a Viking, a term that likely derived from the Old Norse Vik, meaning bay or inlet, perhaps referring to those who went on expeditions from such places, would have been impossible. The warrior, therefore, was intrinsically linked to the ship, a symbiotic relationship that defined their operational sphere. From a young age, the path of the future warrior was subtly, yet firmly, laid out. Childhood in the Norse world was not a period of prolonged innocence as understood in later eras. Survival itself was a constant struggle against the elements, disease, and the ever-present threat of scarcity. Children were integrated into the work of the household and farm from an early age, learning practical skills essential for self-sufficiency. Boys in particular would have been exposed to weapons and their use not as toys, but as tools, extensions of the hand. While formal military academies as we understand them did not exist, training was organic, integrated into daily life. Strength, endurance, and agility were honed through physical labor, plowing fields, felling trees, hauling timber, wrestling, and running. These were not exercises designed for combat, but they built the robust physique necessary for it. Weapon handling would have begun with simplified versions, progressing to full-sized implements as strength and coordination developed. The axe, a ubiquitous tool for carpentry and splitting wood, was also a formidable weapon, and its handling would have been learned naturally. The spear, simpler to forge and use, was likely the first dedicated weapon a young man mastered. Archery, too, was a practical skill for hunting, directly transferable to warfare. Beyond physical prowess, the mental conditioning was paramount. The sagas, the epic narratives of their ancestors, were not mere entertainment. They were moral compasses, instructional manuals, and blueprints for honorable conduct. Gathered around the hearth on long winter nights, young men would listen to tales of legendary warriors, of their bravery, their cunning, their steadfastness in the face of overwhelming odds. They learned about Drigja, the importance of achieving renown and honor through deeds, and Frigg, the enduring fame that outlived the man. Death was an ever-present reality, and the concept of weird fate permeated their worldview. While not entirely deterministic, it fostered a stoic acceptance of one's lot and a focus on how one met their end. A good death, one fought bravely in battle, was far preferable to a lingering demise from sickness or old age. Valhalla, Odin's hall for slain warriors, was not merely a comforting myth but a powerful motivator, promising an afterlife of feasting and combat for those who died valiantly. This fatalism, coupled with an intense focus on personal honor and reputation, created a warrior who was not reckless, but certainly fearless in the face of danger, understanding that the only true defeat was to live as a coward or to be forgotten. The equipment of the Viking warrior, far from being uniform, reflected a spectrum of wealth and status. The idealized image of the fully armored warrior in mail and helmet was likely reserved for the chieftains, the jarls, and their elite retainers. The common carl, the free farmer who comprised the bulk of any fighting force, would have relied on simpler, yet effective, gear. The shield was perhaps the most universal piece of defensive equipment. Typically round, made of planks of wood bound together, often covered in leather or painted, and reinforced with an iron boss in the center to protect the hand. It was not just for defense, it could be used offensively to push, shove, and create space. Its primary purpose was to absorb blows, allowing the warrior to deliver their own. Many would have worn thick wool or leather tunics, perhaps padded, offering some rudimentary protection against glancing blows or cuts. A helmet, if affordable, was a prized possession. The iconic horned helmet is a modern invention, a romanticized fantasy. Actual Viking helmets were typically conical or spangenhelm style, sometimes with a spectacle-like face guard, designed for practical protection, deflecting blows from the head. Mail shirts, woven from thousands of interlocking iron rings, offered superior protection against cuts and slashes, but they were incredibly expensive, time-consuming to produce, and heavy. Only the wealthy few could afford such an investment. Offensive weaponry was similarly varied. The spear was the most common weapon, versatile and relatively inexpensive. It could be thrown or used in close-quarters combat, thrusting or slashing. Its reach provided an advantage, and a well-aimed thrust could penetrate even simple armor. The axe, particularly the Dane axe with its long handle and broad, heavy head, was a devastating weapon in the hands of a skilled warrior. It could cleave through shields, split helmets, and dismember opponents with terrifying efficiency. Its weight meant it required significant strength and training to wield effectively, but its psychological impact on the battlefield was immense. Swords, beautiful and often intricately decorated, were status symbols and highly effective cutting and thrusting weapons. They were typically double-edged, with a broad fuller running down the blade to lighten it, and often had elaborate hilts. A good sword was an heirloom, passed down through generations, often bearing a name and a reputation of its own. Daggers and knives were also carried for close-in work or as last resorts. The proficiency with these weapons was not just about brute strength. It was about balance, footwork, timing, and a deep understanding of human anatomy and the vulnerabilities of an opponent. Life aboard a longship, whether for a raid or a trading voyage, was an exercise in stoicism and endurance. These ships, though masterpieces of naval architecture, offered little comfort. Warriors would have slept on their cloaks, huddled together for warmth, exposed to the elements. The rhythmic creak of timbers, the slap of waves against the hull, the constant chill, and the smell of salt and unwashed bodies would have been their constant companions. Food would have been simple, often dried meat or fish, hardtack, and fermented drinks. Discipline, while not always overtly hierarchical in the way of later navies, was crucial. Each man had a role, whether rowing, handling sails, or keeping watch. The success of the voyage, and indeed their very lives, depended on collective effort and individual competence. Navigation was an art, relying on knowledge of coastal features, currents, prevailing winds, and the position of the sun and stars. They carried sundials and perhaps early forms of magnetic compasses, but much was based on accumulated experience and inherited wisdom. The journey itself was part of the warrior's trial, a test of resilience before the true test of battle even began. The tactical approach of Viking warriors was characterized by speed, surprise, and overwhelming force. Raids were often initiated under the cover of darkness or fog, targeting undefended monasteries, isolated settlements, or wealthy trading centers. The longships would land swiftly, often in shallow water, allowing warriors to disembark quickly and form up. The initial assault was designed to create chaos and terror. The sound of their war cries, the glint of axes, and the sheer ferocity of their charge were often enough to break the morale of unprepared defenders. They sought to disable resistance quickly, seize valuables, and retreat before organized opposition could be mounted. This was not always a full-scale battle. Often it was a smash-and-grab operation. If resistance was encountered, they were capable of forming a Eskejaldborg, a shield wall, a formidable defensive formation where shields overlapped, creating an almost impenetrable barrier against arrows and charges. Within this wall, spears would thrust out, and axes would hack over the top. It was a disciplined, coordinated maneuver that required trust and cohesion among the warriors. They were adaptable, capable of fighting in open fields, forests, or within the narrow confines of a besieged town. Their ferocity was not born of uncontrolled rage, but of a calculated strategy to instill fear and achieve objectives with minimal casualties to themselves. The plunder, often the primary objective of a raid, was not merely about material gain. It was about wealth, yes, but also about status, about providing for one's family and community, and about demonstrating success. Gold, silver, slaves, livestock, and exotic goods were all valuable commodities. The distribution of loot was a complex affair, often dictated by the chieftain, reflecting the warrior's contribution and standing. A successful raid enhanced the reputation of the leader and attracted more followers for future expeditions. It fueled the economic engine of their society, allowing for trade, investment in land and ships, and the acquisition of more resources. But the warrior's life was not solely about raiding. The same ships and skills that facilitated plunder also enabled extensive trade networks. Viking merchants traversed vast distances, exchanging furs, timber, amber, and slaves for silver, silks, spices, and other goods from Byzantium, the Islamic world, and beyond. Many warriors were also farmers, returning to their lands after the campaigning season to tend to their crops and livestock. This duality, warrior and farmer, raider and trader, is crucial to understanding their multifaceted existence. They were pragmatic survivors, adapting their skills to whatever opportunities presented themselves. The social fabric of Viking society was structured around concepts of kinship, loyalty, and personal honor. The Thing, an assembly of free men, served as a legislative and judicial body where disputes were settled, laws were made, and alliances were forged. Though seemingly democratic, influence at the Thing was often wielded by powerful jarls and chieftains who commanded wealth and loyal followers. Feuds and blood vengeance, while seemingly chaotic, were a recognized form of justice in the absence of a strong centralized authority. A warrior's standing was inextricably linked to his family's honor and his own reputation. To be shamed, to be called a coward, was worse than death. This societal pressure to uphold one's honor, to avenge wrongs, and to demonstrate courage was a powerful motivator for martial prowess. The thralls, or slaves, formed the lowest rung of society, often captured during raids or born into servitude. Their labor supported the free population, allowing warriors to dedicate time to training, raiding, and political affairs. This hierarchical structure, while brutal, provided a framework within which the warrior ethos could flourish, incentivizing risk-taking and providing a clear path to social advancement through deeds. The legacy of the Viking warrior is not simply one of destruction and conquest. Their voyages led to the discovery and settlement of Iceland, Greenland, and briefly, North America. They established trading posts and settlements that grew into major cities such as Dublin, York, and Kiev. Their influence on language, law, and culture across Europe was profound. The warrior, therefore, was also an explorer, a colonizer, and an agent of cultural exchange, albeit often a violent one. They integrated into the societies they encountered, sometimes by force, sometimes through negotiation and intermarriage. The very definition of Viking began to blur as their descendants settled, adopted Christianity, and became indistinguishable from the local populations. The warrior spirit, however, endured, transforming into the chivalric knightly orders of medieval Europe, or the disciplined mercenary bands that plied their trade across the continent. The raw, pragmatic ferocity of the early Viking warrior evolved, but its core tenets, courage, loyalty, and the pursuit of honor, continued to resonate in different forms. The end of the Viking Age was not marked by a single event, but a gradual decline in large-scale raiding, influenced by the strengthening of centralized monarchies in Europe, the Christianization of Scandinavia, and the increasing difficulty of finding easy targets. The warrior, once a free agent ranging far and wide, slowly became integrated into more structured feudal systems, their skills repurposed for the defense of kingdoms rather than their plunder. For the individual warrior, death in battle remained a highly revered end, a direct path to the halls of Odin. But many lived to old age, settling down, becoming respected elders, farmers, or merchants. The sagas often depict these warriors reflecting on their past deeds, their triumphs and their losses, their lives a testament to the harsh realities and fleeting glories of their era. To be a Viking warrior was to live a life on the edge, constantly balancing risk and reward, honor and survival. It was a life shaped by the unforgiving northern landscape, by the boundless opportunities of the sea, and by a cultural imperative to strive for greatness, to make one's mark, and to be remembered. It was a life of constant adaptation, of brutal choices, and of an unwavering commitment to a way of life that, for a few centuries, reshaped the course of European history. And yet, the story of what it truly meant to be a Viking warrior, how their world unfolded, how their legacy continues to echo through the ages, is far from over. The conceptual framework that underpinned the Viking warriors' existence was deeply interwoven with their polytheistic faith, a complex tapestry of gods, giants, and cosmic forces. Far from being a mere collection of stories, Norse paganism was a living, breathing system that provided meaning, explained the inexplicable, and offered a blueprint for a life well lived and a death well met. At its apex sat Odin, the All-Father, god of war, wisdom, poetry, and death. He was the patron of kings and warriors, and the promise of Valhalla, his great hall in Asgard, was the ultimate aspiration for those who fell bravely in battle. To be chosen by the Valkyries, Odin's shield maidens, and carried to Valhalla was not just a reward. It was a continuation of the warrior's existence, where they would feast, drink, and train daily, preparing for the final battle of Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods. This belief system instilled a profound fatalism, but not one of passive resignation. Rather, it encouraged a proactive embrace of destiny, an understanding that while one's end might be predetermined, the manner in which one met it was entirely within their control. Courage, honor, and a willingness to face death without fear were not just virtues, they were prerequisites for an afterlife of glory. Thor, the thunder god, with his mighty hammer Mjolnir, represented strength, protection, and the defense of Midgard, the human realm, against the chaotic forces of the giants. He was the god of the common people, invoked for protection during voyages, for good harvests, and for success in single combat. Freyja, goddess of love, fertility, and war, also received a share of the slain, welcoming them to her hall, Folkvanger. This pantheon, with its vibrant, often violent deities, mirrored the harsh realities of their own lives. Sacrifices, often of animals, but occasionally human in times of great crisis or for particularly significant events, were made to appease the gods, to seek their favor before a raid, or to give thanks for a successful venture. Omens were sought in the flight of birds, the patterns of clouds, or the entrails of sacrificed animals, guiding decisions on when and where to strike. The Seder, a form of shamanistic magic, was practiced by Vurler or Seithkennr, female practitioners, and sometimes Sathmen, male practitioners, who could delve into fate, speak with spirits, and influence events, though male practitioners often faced social stigma. This spiritual dimension was not separate from the warrior's life. It was integral, providing a moral and existential compass in a world that offered few certainties. The structure of Viking society, while seemingly less rigid than the feudal systems emerging elsewhere, was nonetheless hierarchical and governed by a complex web of customs and laws, often articulated at the thing. These assemblies were not merely places for legal judgments. They were social hubs, markets, and political arenas where alliances were forged, grievances aired, and reputations made or broken. For a warrior, the thing could be as dangerous as any battlefield, requiring rhetorical skill, the support of kin, and a keen understanding of social dynamics. Disputes over land, property, or honor could escalate quickly, often leading to blood feuds or vendettas which could span generations. The concept of wergild or man price was an attempt to mitigate these cycles of violence, allowing for compensation to be paid for injuries or deaths, thus preventing further bloodshed. However, if wergild was refused or deemed insufficient, the aggrieved party was often honor-bound to seek vengeance. This system, while brutal, served as a form of social control, incentivizing individuals and families to maintain their honor and deterring unprovoked aggression, as it carried the risk of severe retribution. A warrior's prowess was not only demonstrated on foreign shores, but also within their own community, defending their family's honor and upholding their reputation. Within this societal framework, specific warrior archetypes emerged, none more infamous than the berserker and Ulfheithnar. Often romanticized as uncontrollable, drug-fueled madmen, the reality was likely more nuanced. The term berserker likely derived from bear shirt or bear shirt, suggesting warriors who fought without armor or clad in animal skins, perhaps to invoke the spirit of the beast. Their ferocity in battle was legendary, often described as entering a trance-like state, impervious to pain, biting their shields, and howling like wild animals. While some theories suggest the use of hallucinogenic mushrooms or alcohol, it is equally plausible that their frenzy was a form of ritualized autosuggestion, a psychological technique to overcome fear and unleash primal aggression. They were shock troops deployed to break enemy lines, their terrifying appearance and seemingly superhuman strength designed to instill panic. The Ulfheithnar were similar, associated with wolves, perhaps fighting in wolf skins. These elite warriors were not just individuals, they were likely part of specialized cults or retinues, bound by oaths and a shared, intense spiritual connection to their animal totems. Their existence underscores that the Viking warrior ethos encompassed not just physical training, but also a profound psychological and spiritual dimension, leveraging every possible advantage, both tangible and intangible, in the pursuit of victory. The interaction of Viking warriors with other cultures was not a monolithic experience of pure conquest. While raids were undeniably destructive, they also served as catalysts for extensive cultural exchange and the establishment of new polities. In the east, particularly along the river systems of what would become Russia, Swedish Vikings, known as the Rus, established vital trade routes connecting Scandinavia to Byzantium and the Islamic caliphates. They acted as merchants, mercenaries, and eventually state builders, founding settlements like Novgorod and Kiev, which became the nuclei of early Russian states. The Varangian Guard, an elite unit of the Byzantine Emperor's personal bodyguards, was largely composed of Norsemen, their loyalty and ferocity highly prized. These warriors, far from their northern homelands, encountered a world of unparalleled sophistication, of grand cities, intricate legal systems, and advanced technologies. They returned with silks, spices, silver, and gold, but also with new ideas, new words, and a broader understanding of the world, enriching their own culture in the process. In the West, the story was often one of initial terror, followed by settlement and eventual assimilation. In England, the Great Heathen Army, a massive coalition of Viking forces systematically conquered vast swathes of Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, leading to the establishment of the Danelaw, an area under Norse legal and cultural influence. Here, Viking warriors transitioned from raiders to settlers, becoming farmers, traders, and administrators, intermarrying with the local population. The linguistic impact is still evident in English today, with hundreds of words of Old Norse origin. In Ireland, Viking longforts, ship forts, evolved into major urban centers like Dublin, Waterford, and Limerick, transforming the island's economic and political landscape. The warrior, therefore, was not always a transient figure of destruction. Often, they were the vanguard of colonization, laying the foundations for new societies, adapting their martial skills to the demands of governing and defending newly acquired territories. This process was often violent, but it was also profoundly transformative, creating hybrid cultures that blended Norse traditions with those of the conquered peoples. The very act of exploration, a core aspect of the Viking Age, required a warrior's mindset. The voyages to Iceland, Greenland, and ultimately Vinland, North America, were not undertaken by timid merchants. They were expeditions into the unknown, fraught with peril, demanding courage, resilience, and the ability to fight against both the elements and any hostile indigenous populations encountered. The settlement of Iceland, for example, was a deliberate act of colonization by chieftains and their followers fleeing the consolidation of power in Norway. These were warriors who, rather than submit to a king, chose to carve out new lives in a harsh, untamed land. They brought their laws, their sagas, and their martial traditions with them, establishing a society that for centuries remained remarkably independent and preserved much of the Old Norse culture. The challenges of establishing a foothold in Greenland and the brief, ultimately unsuccessful, attempts to settle Vinland illustrate the limits of their warrior prowess against overwhelming natural obstacles and determined native resistance. These were not just adventures, they were strategic endeavors, driven by a combination of ambition, a thirst for land and resources, and an inherent willingness to face the unknown. The aesthetics of Viking warfare were not merely functional, they were imbued with deep symbolic meaning and artistic expression. Weapons were often beautifully crafted, with intricate patterns forged into sword blades, pattern welding, hilts adorned with silver and gold, and axe heads inlaid with precious metals. Runes, the ancient Germanic script, were not just for writing, they were believed to possess magical properties, often carved into weapons for protection or to enhance their effectiveness. A sword might bear a name, such as leg biter or skull splitter, reflecting its feared reputation. Shields were often painted with geometric designs, animal motifs, or symbols of protection. Personal adornment, such as elaborate brooches, arm rings, and necklaces, often served as displays of wealth and status, but also carried protective amulets or symbols of their faith. The very ships with their carved dragon or serpent prows were not just vessels but terrifying psychological weapons, designed to strike fear into the hearts of those on shore. This blend of practicality and artistry speaks to a culture that valued not just brute force, but also skill, craftsmanship, and the power of symbolism. A warrior's gear was an extension of their identity, a testament to their wealth, their skill, and their connection to the spiritual world. The decline of the Viking Age was a complex, multifaceted process, not a sudden collapse. One of the most significant factors was the gradual Christianization of Scandinavia. As kings and chieftains converted, often influenced by their interactions with Christian Europe, the old pagan ways, including the emphasis on raiding for glory and plunder, began to wane. Christian monarchs sought to consolidate power, establish stable kingdoms, and integrate into the broader European political landscape, which meant discouraging independent raiding and promoting more formalized trade and diplomacy. The very targets of Viking raids also became stronger and more organized. Anglo-Saxon England, for example, developed a more effective standing army and a network of fortified burhs, making raids less profitable and more dangerous. The economic landscape also shifted. As trade routes became more established and secure, the immediate need for plunder diminished. Many former warriors found new roles as mercenaries within European armies, as traders, or simply as settled farmers and craftsmen in their homelands or in the lands they had colonized. The fierce independence and decentralized nature that had characterized the early Viking warrior gave way to more structured feudal loyalties and the demands of emerging nation-states. Yet the spirit of the Viking warrior did not simply vanish. It transformed, evolving into new expressions of martial prowess. The disciplined, often brutal fighting techniques honed over centuries influenced the development of European warfare. The sagas and eddas, oral traditions committed to writing centuries later, preserved the memory of their heroic deeds, their values, and their worldview. The archaeological record, meticulously unearthed from burial mounds, ship burials, and settlement sites, continues to reveal new insights into their daily lives, their craftsmanship, and their profound connection to their spiritual beliefs. The Viking warrior, in essence, became a foundational archetype in the European imagination, a figure of both terror and admiration, embodying a primal strength and an unyielding will. Their legacy is not just in the place names they left behind, or the words they contributed to languages, but in the enduring fascination with their courage, their adaptability, and their relentless drive to explore, to conquer, and to survive in a world that offered no easy path. To truly grasp what it meant to be a Viking warrior is to understand a life lived on the razor's edge, a constant negotiation between the demands of honor, the pursuit of wealth, and the ever-present shadow of fate. It is a story of human resilience, of profound cultural impact, and of a spirit that, though centuries removed, continues to resonate in our collective imagination. And the layers of this intricate history, the nuances of their lives, their beliefs, and their enduring impact, are still being uncovered, still being understood. Don't stop, will continue. The very air they breathed, the land they tilled, and the seas they traversed were saturated with a profound sense of the sacred and the profane, a duality that shaped their warrior ethos. Every act, from the forging of a sword to the launching of a longship, could be imbued with ritual significance, a plea for divine favor or a ward against malevolent forces. The landscape itself was alive with spirits, the Landvitir land spirits that protected their farms, the Huljufolk hidden folk that inhabited the wilderness, and the terrifying Draugr ghosts that guarded ancient burial mounds. To navigate this world required not just physical strength but spiritual awareness, a constant negotiation with the seen and unseen. A warrior might carry a Mjolnir amulet for protection, or wear a raven symbol, sacred to Odin, hoping to gain his favor in battle. They understood that courage alone was not enough. One also needed Hamingja, a personal luck or fortune that could be inherited from ancestors or earned through deeds, a vital, almost tangible quality that could turn the tide of battle or ensure a safe return. This intertwining of the mundane and the mythical extended to their understanding of death. While Valhalla was the ultimate reward for the brave, not all warriors met their end on the battlefield. Many succumbed to disease, accidents, or old age, and their afterlives were less clear, perhaps residing in the realm of hell, a neutral place for those who did not die valiantly. This did not diminish the importance of a good death, but it underscored the pragmatic reality that life was fragile and unpredictable. Burial practices varied widely, from simple graves to elaborate ship burials for chieftains and wealthy individuals, often accompanied by grave goods, weapons, tools, jewelry, and even sacrificed animals or thralls, intended to accompany the deceased into the next world. These burials were not just acts of mourning. They were statements of status, affirmations of belief, and sometimes warnings to potential grave robbers. The warrior's journey continued even after death, a testament to a worldview that saw life as a continuum, not an abrupt end. The practicalities of campaigning, especially on extended expeditions, demanded a high degree of organization and logistical prowess, often underestimated by those who view Vikings solely as chaotic raiders. While not a standing army in the modern sense, a Viking fleet or land force required careful planning. Provisions had to be gathered, ships maintained, and routes charted. Leadership was crucial, resting on the charisma and strategic acumen of the jarl or chieftain. His ability to inspire loyalty, distribute plunder fairly, and make sound tactical decisions determined the success or failure of an expedition. Discipline, though perhaps less formal than in Roman legions, was enforced through a combination of social pressure, the fear of dishonor, and the direct authority of the leader. Challenges to authority, while not uncommon, could lead to duels, holmgang, or ostracism, both severe consequences in a society that valued community and reputation. The holmgang, a ritualized duel to settle disputes, was a stark reminder that personal honor could be defended with blood, even within their own ranks. It was a brutal but recognized mechanism for conflict resolution, a testament to a society that embraced direct confrontation. Consider the nature of siege warfare, a less common but certainly documented aspect of Viking campaigns. While their strength lay in rapid amphibious assaults, they were not incapable of sustained operations. The sieges of Paris, London, and other fortified towns demonstrate their adaptability. They would construct temporary camps, build siege engines, though often rudimentary compared to those of the Byzantines or Franks, and employ tactics of blockade, starvation, and repeated assaults. These operations required patience, a larger force, and a more complex logistical tale. It also exposed them to diseases that ravaged their ranks, a constant threat on any long campaign. The ability to shift from lightning raids to protracted sieges showcases the strategic flexibility of their leaders and the endurance of their warriors, further dispelling the simplistic image of mere berserking barbarians. Their encounters with the more sophisticated, centralized states of continental Europe and the British Isles forced them to adapt and learn. They observed Roman and Frankish fortifications, military formations, and administrative structures. While they often preferred their own methods, they were not adverse to incorporating effective foreign practices. The adoption of coinage, for instance, from the silver of the Abbasid Caliphate to Anglo-Saxon pennies, was a practical necessity for trade, and the warriors themselves often melted down foreign coins into ingots or jewelry, demonstrating a pragmatic approach to wealth. Their longships, while unparalleled for coastal and riverine operations, were not suited for all purposes, and they would sometimes requisition or build smaller, more specialized boats for inland waterways. This pragmatic adaptability was a hallmark of the Viking warrior. They were not bound by rigid doctrine, but by effectiveness and opportunity. The experience of being a warrior was also deeply personal, shaped by the individual's journey. For some, it might have been a means to escape poverty or social constraints, to seek land and wealth not available in their crowded homelands. For others, it was a path to glory, to fulfill an inherited destiny, or to avenge a family slight. The sagas are replete with examples of warriors who embarked on long, perilous journeys not just for plunder, but for free, enduring fame, a reputation that would echo through the generations, ensuring they were remembered long after their death. This desire for renown was a powerful driver, pushing men to perform acts of incredible bravery, sometimes against impossible odds. It fostered a culture of individual heroism, where a single warrior's deeds could elevate their status and inspire their comrades. This focus on individual achievement within a collective effort is a defining characteristic of the Viking warrior, distinct from the more anonymous soldiers of mass armies. The psychological toll of constant warfare, of living with the ever-present threat of death or disfigurement, is something the sagas touch upon with a stark realism. While celebrating bravery, they also acknowledge loss, grief, and the harsh consequences of violence. Warriors carried scars, both visible and invisible. The camaraderie forged in the crucible of battle was profound, a bond of brotherhood often stronger than familial ties. To fight alongside one's chosen companions, to share the risks and the spoils, created an unbreakable loyalty that was essential for survival. Betrayal, therefore, was the ultimate sin, often met with severe retribution. This emphasis on loyalty to one's comrades and chieftain was a cornerstone of the warrior code, ensuring cohesion in a world where every man depended on his neighbor's courage and steadfastness. The image of the Viking warrior also evolved significantly over time, even within their own societies. As Scandinavia Christianized, the old pagan warrior ideals gradually merged with Christian concepts of knighthood and chivalry. The emphasis shifted from dying gloriously for Odin to fighting for God and king. The raw, often brutal, pragmatism of the early raiders gave way to more formalized military structures and a different set of ethical considerations. Yet the underlying virtues of courage, loyalty, and strength persisted, simply recontextualized within a new religious and political framework. The very word Viking itself, originally a term for an overseas expedition or the person undertaking it, slowly became synonymous with the people of Scandinavia, and later with a romanticized, sometimes demonized historical archetype. The very fabric of Viking society, which the warrior both defended and exploited, was intricately woven with the domestic sphere, a realm largely overseen by women. While the sagas predominantly focus on male exploits, the role of the husfru, the mistress of the house, was indispensable. She managed the farm, the livestock, the food preservation, and the household economy in the warrior's absence. She held the keys to the household stores, symbolizing her authority and control over the family's resources. A warrior could not embark on long voyages or engage in protracted campaigns without the assurance that his home front was secure, managed by a competent and resilient woman. This interdependence meant that the warrior's success was not solely his own. It was a collective effort, underpinned by the stability and productivity of the household. A strong, capable wife was not just a partner, but a strategic asset, enabling the warrior to pursue honor and wealth abroad, knowing his legacy and his family's survival were in capable hands. Furthermore, women played a crucial role in upholding family honor, often encouraging or even instigating vengeance for wrongs committed against their kin, thereby directly influencing the warrior's actions and motivations. Their voices, though less often recorded directly, were powerful forces in the social dynamics that shaped the warrior's life. The concept of honor, either, for the Viking warrior extended far beyond mere battlefield bravery. It was a multifaceted construct encompassing reputation, integrity, and the fulfillment of one's word. To be considered an honorable man meant to be true to one's oaths, to be generous to one's followers and guests, and to uphold the dignity of one's family. Hospitality, justricny, was a sacred duty. A warrior's home was expected to be open to travelers, and generosity in feasting and gift-giving cemented alliances and fostered loyalty. Conversely, stinginess or breaking an oath could lead to profound shame, nith, a social death that often carried worse consequences than physical demise. Nith could be declared through insulting poetry or public shaming rituals, effectively stripping a man of his standing and isolating him from his community. For a warrior whose very identity was tied to his reputation, such a fate was unthinkable. This complex system of honor and shame served as a powerful regulator of behavior, encouraging adherence to social norms and fostering a sense of collective responsibility for the family's and individual standing. The pursuit of honor was not merely a personal quest, but a societal imperative, driving warriors to acts of valor and self-sacrifice, ensuring their name and that of their kin would be remembered with respect. Central to the warrior's life was the bond with his chieftain, the jarl or konungur king, and his place within the chieftain's hird or retinue. This was not a relationship based on abstract patriotism, but on personal loyalty and mutual benefit. The chieftain provided leadership, protection, and opportunities for wealth and renown through raids and expeditions. In return, the warriors offered their unwavering service, their fighting prowess, and their lives if necessary. The chieftain was expected to be generous with the spoils of war, distributing wealth and gifts to his followers, thereby reinforcing their loyalty and attracting new recruits. This system of patronage and reciprocity was the bedrock of Viking military organization. A successful chieftain attracted a larger, more formidable herd, further enhancing his power and prestige. The loyalty within the herd was intensely personal, often transcending family ties, and a warrior's commitment to his chieftain was a source of immense pride. The sagas often depict the tragic dilemmas faced by warriors forced to choose between conflicting loyalties, highlighting the profound importance of these bonds. The herd was more than just a fighting force. It was a chosen family, bound by shared purpose, peril, and the promise of glory. The deeds of these warriors, their triumphs and their tragedies, were immortalized not just in oral tradition, but through the intricate and evocative art of skaldic poetry. The skalds were court poets, masters of complex poetic forms, who composed verses celebrating the exploits of chieftains and warriors. Their poetry was not simple narrative. It was rich with kennings, metaphorical circumlocutions, e.g., whale road for sea, sword sweat for blood, and heighty poetic synonyms, making it challenging and highly esteemed. A skald's ability to craft intricate verses that vividly depicted battle, praised a chieftain's generosity, or lamented a warrior's death was a highly valued skill. For the warrior, being the subject of a skaldic poem was the ultimate form of frigd, enduring fame. It meant their deeds would be remembered long after their bodies had turned to dust, passed down through generations. This poetic tradition served as a powerful incentive for brave deeds, knowing that their actions might be immortalized in verse, ensuring their place in the collective memory of their people. The skald was, in essence, the chronicler of their time, shaping the narrative of heroism and honor, and ensuring that the warrior's legacy transcended their mortal existence. While often united against foreign adversaries, the Viking world was far from monolithic. Internal conflicts, civil wars, and feuds between rival chieftains and nascent kingdoms were constant features of the landscape. Warriors frequently found themselves fighting against other Norsemen, sometimes even kin, over land, power, or honor. These internal struggles were often as brutal and unforgiving as any foreign campaign. The Battle of Hafrsfjord, traditionally dated to 872 AD, is often cited as a pivotal moment, where Harald Fairhair consolidated his rule over much of Norway, leading many defeated chieftains and their warriors to seek new lands and opportunities overseas, thereby fueling further Viking expansion. These internal dynamics highlight that the Viking warrior was not a homogeneous entity fighting a singular enemy. They were often entangled in complex political landscapes, shifting alliances, and bitter rivalries within their own culture. The skills honed in foreign raids were just as applicable and often applied to conflicts closer to home, shaping the political map of Scandinavia itself. The warrior's allegiance was not to an abstract nation, but to a specific chieftain, a family, or a cause, and these loyalties could be tested and broken by the tides of internal power struggles. The very choice of a weapon, beyond its practical utility, often carried deep personal and symbolic significance. A sword, often named and passed down through generations, was more than just steel. It was a living entity, imbued with the spirit of its previous owners and their deeds. To lose one's sword in battle, or to have it break, was not just a tactical setback, but a spiritual blow, a potential harbinger of ill fortune. The craftsmanship involved in creating these weapons was extraordinary, particularly the pattern-welded swords, where multiple rods of steel were twisted and forged together, creating a beautiful, wavy pattern on the blade, reminiscent of flowing water or wood grain. This process not only made the blade stronger and more flexible, but also imbued it with a mystical quality. A warrior's axe, while perhaps less ornate than a sword, was no less vital, often customized to suit its wielder's fighting style. The intimate relationship between a warrior and his weapon, forged through countless hours of training and the crucible of combat, was profound. It was an extension of his will, a tool of his destiny, and often his closest companion in the face of death. Beyond the grand narratives of raids and battles, the daily life of a warrior, even on campaign, was characterized by constant vigilance and adaptation to the harsh realities of their environment. Food on long voyages consisted of dried meat, fish, hardtack, and fermented drinks, supplemented by whatever could be hunted, fished, or plundered. Sanitation was rudimentary, and disease was a constant companion, often claiming more lives than battle. Injuries, if not immediately fatal, could be debilitating in an age without advanced medical knowledge. A broken bone, a deep cut, or an infected wound could mean a slow, agonizing death or permanent disability, rendering a warrior incapable of fighting and thus a burden to his comrades. This vulnerability underscored the importance of skill and caution in battle, balancing the desire for glory with the pragmatic need for survival. The warrior was not invincible. They were human, subject to the same frailties as any other, but they faced these realities with a stoicism born of necessity and a profound belief in their own agency within the framework of fate. The Viking Age was also a period of significant demographic shifts and environmental pressures in Scandinavia. Growing populations, limited arable land, and perhaps even a medieval warm period that facilitated longer sailing seasons, all contributed to the impetus for expansion. For many young men, participating in a Viking expedition was not just about seeking glory, but about securing a future, whether through acquiring land, wealth, or a social standing that might be unattainable in their home communities. This economic driver was a powerful force, pushing warriors across oceans and continents. The promise of fertile lands in Iceland or the British Isles, or the vast silver hoards of the Caliphate, offered tangible rewards that often outweighed the risks. The warrior, therefore, was also an economic agent, a participant in a grand, sometimes brutal, redistribution of wealth and resources that reshaped the economic landscape of early medieval Europe. Their raids were not random acts of violence, but often calculated economic ventures, targeting areas rich in resources and weak in defense. The echoes of the Viking Age, those centuries of relentless expansion and profound transformation, did not simply fade into silence. They reverberated, reshaping the political, economic, and cultural landscapes of a continent. The individual Viking warrior, that figure of fierce independence and brutal efficacy, was not extinguished but rather absorbed, transformed, and ultimately recontextualized within the emerging structures of medieval Europe. The decline of the great raiding expeditions was a protracted affair, a slow, inexorable shift driven by forces both internal and external, far more intricate than a simple military defeat. As the Scandinavian kingdoms consolidated power, as kings like Harald Hardrada sought to impose order and unify their realms, the freebooting life of the independent warrior became increasingly anachronistic, even undesirable. The allure of plunder remained, but the risks escalated dramatically as the targets of their raids, particularly England and the Frankish realms, developed more sophisticated defenses, standing armies, and fortified networks. The monastic communities, once easy pickings, were now often protected by formidable lords, and the element of surprise, so crucial to early Viking success, became harder to achieve. Moreover, the gradual but pervasive Christianization of Scandinavia fundamentally altered the spiritual and moral compass of the warrior. The promise of Valhalla, of an afterlife of endless feasting and battle in Odin's hall, slowly gave way to the Christian concept of salvation, of a heaven attained through faith and righteous conduct. While the old gods did not vanish overnight, their hold on the collective psyche weakened. Kings, eager to align themselves with the powerful Christian monarchs of Europe, adopted the new faith, often imposing it upon their subjects. This shift brought with it new legal codes, new forms of governance, and a different understanding of warfare. The emphasis moved from personal glory and plunder to service to God and King, to the defense of Christian lands against pagan incursions, or to the crusades against infidels in distant lands. The raw pagan ferocity of the berserker found less and less room in a world increasingly defined by Christian piety, even if that piety often coexisted with brutal violence. Yet the martial prowess forged in the Viking Age was not lost, it was repurposed. Many Norse warriors, no longer able to ply their trade as independent raiders, found new opportunities as mercenaries in the armies of Europe. The Varangian Guard in Byzantium, composed primarily of Norsemen and later Anglo-Saxons, stands as a testament to their enduring reputation as formidable fighters. These warriors, far from their homelands, served emperors, defended cities, and fought in campaigns across the Eastern Roman Empire, their axes and shields still striking fear into their enemies, but now in the service of a new master and often a new faith. In England, the descendants of Viking settlers became integral to the Anglo-Danish aristocracy, their martial traditions blending with those of the Anglo-Saxons, eventually contributing to the formation of a unified English identity, albeit one forged in the crucible of conquest and cultural fusion. The very concept of the knight, with his emphasis on honor, loyalty, and martial skill, can be seen as a distant echo of the Viking warrior ethos, albeit refined and reinterpreted through a Christian lens. The settlements established during the Viking Age, from Dublin to Novgorod, evolved from temporary encampments to thriving urban centers, becoming integral nodes in the burgeoning European trade networks. The warrior who once plundered these nascent towns often became their defender, their merchant, or their administrator. The skills honed on the longship, navigation, seamanship, and an acute understanding of trade routes translated seamlessly into peaceful commerce. The same entrepreneurial spirit that drove them to raid also propelled them to establish vast trading networks, exchanging furs, timber, and slaves for silver, silks, and spices from distant lands. The Viking Age, therefore, was not merely a period of destructive incursions, but also a crucial phase of globalization, connecting disparate regions and facilitating an unprecedented exchange of goods, ideas, and people. The warrior in this context was not just an agent of violence, but also a catalyst for economic integration and cultural diffusion. The enduring fascination with the Viking warrior in the modern imagination is a testament to their profound historical impact. They embody a certain primal freedom, a rugged individualism, and an adventurous spirit that resonates deeply. However, this popular image often simplifies a far more complex reality. The archaeological discoveries continue to challenge and refine our understanding, unearthing new evidence of their sophisticated craftsmanship, their intricate social structures, their complex spiritual beliefs, and their nuanced interactions with the world around them. From the detailed carvings on their Oseberg ship to the intricate patterns on their sword hilts, from the sagas that speak of both brutal revenge and profound loyalty, to the runic inscriptions that reveal their thoughts and fears, every artifact, every text, every excavated site adds another layer to the mosaic of their existence. To understand what it truly meant to be a Viking warrior is to look beyond the stereotype of the axe-wielding barbarian and to see the man of his time, a skilled seafarer, a pragmatic farmer, a cunning trader, a loyal follower, and above all, a survivor in a harsh and unforgiving world. It was a life defined by courage in the face of overwhelming odds, by a relentless pursuit of honor and renown, and by an unwavering belief in the power of one's own deeds to shape destiny. They were not just destroyers, they were creators, explorers, and colonizers, leaving an indelible mark on the lands they touched. Their legacy is woven into the very fabric of European history, in the languages we speak, the cities we inhabit, and the very concept of exploration and conquest. the Viking warrior, in their brutal glory and their complex humanity, remains a powerful and compelling figure, a mirror reflecting both the darkness and the boundless potential of human ambition. Their story, though centuries removed, continues to inform our understanding of courage, conflict, and the enduring human spirit, a testament to a people who dared to challenge the known world and in doing so irrevocably changed its course. The age of the Viking warrior as a dominant force may have ended, but their profound impact on history and our continuous reevaluation of it ensures their story is far from silent.